A cold November wind blew into the suburban house. Carol Watson sank into her favorite armchair under the soft living room lights, holding a newly acquired mystery novel. Even at 65, she remained captivated by the scent of printed words and the worlds within stories. Late-night reading had become her habit. In the 2 years since losing her husband George, she had tried to fill her lonely nights with fictional worlds. The small bookstore she had run for 35 years in Northampton had become her very reason for living. Her daily routine consisted of enjoying conversations with regular customers during the day and immersing herself in stories at night. Just as the clock was about to strike 11:30, the sudden sound of the intercom broke the silence. At this hour, Carol adjusted her glasses as she stood up. The entrance monitor showed 2 uniformed police officers. With her 35 years of experience running the bookstore, she was confident in her ability to read people. The older one appeared to be in his mid-50s, the younger one in his early 30s. Their expressions carried a sense of urgency. The last time the police had visited was that day 2 years ago. The news of her husband's accident. Falling down the stairs. Shaking off the resurfacing memories, Carol pressed the intercom button. "Is this the residence of Mrs. Carol Watson?" "Yes, that's me." As she opened the front door, cold night air rushed in. The senior officer presented his badge. His expression, illuminated by the streetlight, carried a hint of tension. "I'm Officer Johnson from the Massachusetts State Police." "This is difficult to say, but..." The officer hesitated for a moment. That brief pause heightened Carol's anxiety. "Your grandson has been found chained up in the basement of a facility in the city." Carol felt as if time had stopped. A ringing sound filled her ears. "But I don't have a grandson." When she responded with a trembling voice, the officer's expression froze. The younger officer behind him clearly couldn't hide his bewilderment. "What did you say?" The officer's confused voice echoed in the midnight silence. Carol's heart began to pound violently. She hadn't been this shaken since losing her husband George to the stair accident 2 years ago. "We'd like to discuss this in detail. Would you mind coming to the station with us?" Carol glanced back at the living room. On the table lay the book, still open to the page she'd been reading, a cup of warm tea, and an unfinished knitted scarf. The peaceful everyday life that had existed just minutes ago suddenly felt like a distant world. "Please wait a moment. Let me get my coat." Her steps toward the upstairs bedroom felt unusually heavy. As she climbed the stairs, Carol thought about her son David. As a local newspaper reporter, he occasionally went on business trips. Recently, he seemed to be pursuing some major story, and his visits had become less frequent. When they met after church last Sunday, he appeared troubled by something. She took out a navy blue coat from the bedroom closet. It was the last Christmas present from her husband. Looking at her reflection in the mirror, the graying hair, the deepening wrinkles, she saw an ordinary elderly woman who had managed a small-town bookstore. She knew David was still single, but a grandson. On her way back downstairs, she paused in front of the study. Her husband's desk remained untouched. Just before the accident, he had said he'd found some important documents. Now she would never know what they contained. As she got into the police car, the younger officer began explaining. His voice carried a note of concern. Your grandson's emergency contact was listed as David Watson. However, we couldn't reach him at the newspaper where he works, and you were listed as David's emergency contact. Street lights passed by the car window. Carol remembered her 35 years at the bookstore. Her husband sweeping the storefront before opening at 8 a.m. Regular customers dropping by on weekends. Members of the church reading group. College student customers. David doing his homework in the corner as a child. What had been happening beneath those peaceful days? The police car drove quietly, arriving at the station in the dead of night. Just before entering the building, Carol looked up at the sky. It was a dark night without a single star visible. Something was about to begin. Something that would shake her life and everything she knew to be true. The heavy entrance door opened with an ominous sound. Despite the late hour, the police station's consultation room was filled with an unusual tension. Carol sat in a hard chair, clasping her hands tightly on her knees. The wall clock was about to strike midnight. Sorry to keep you waiting. A female social worker entered the room. She appeared to be in her mid-40s. Though her eyes seemed kind, her expression was tense. I'll bring in the boy. At those words, Carol's heart began racing. The door opened, and a small boy entered. He appeared to be around 12 years old. His thin frame looked as fragile as a twig about to break. However, what caught Carol's attention was his face. It couldn't be. The boy looked exactly like David. The resemblance to her son when he was in high school over 20 years ago was striking. Carol's hands began to tremble. My name is Ethan. The boy's voice was surprisingly calm. However, in his eyes lurked an indescribable loneliness. David Watson is my father. The air in the room froze. Carol caught her breath. Ethan continued. But I've never met him. Professor Thomas said my father abandoned me. The boy's words were cut off by a sudden fit of coughing. The social worker hurriedly offered him water. Carol started to stand up, but at that moment, hurried footsteps were heard from the hallway. Mom! David burst into the room. His usually neat hair was disheveled, his tie askew. He clearly appeared to have been called away from work. And when his eyes met Ethan's, the blood drained from David's face. Ethan. He called the boy's name in a hoarse voice. Ethan took a step back, moving closer to the social worker as if seeking protection. While we can't make any definitive statements until the DNA test results come back, the police officer began explaining. Based on Ethan's testimony and physical characteristics, no test is necessary. David interrupted. His voice sounded more anguished than Carol had ever heard from her son. He is, indeed, my son. Carol felt the world spinning. David rushed to support his mother's shoulders. Please, let me explain. David took a deep breath and began to tell the truth from 20 years ago. It happened when he was a sophomore in college. A romance with Mary, whom he met in the literature department. Her pregnancy. Following the suggestion of their mentor, Professor Thomas Green, they decided to place the child in a care facility. They were too young. Mary wanted to establish herself as an artist. David was pursuing his dream of becoming a journalist. Professor Thomas promised to find good foster parents. David's voice trembled. But why was Ethan in the facility? That's the core of this case. A new voice rang out. A tall male detective had entered the room. We have strong suspicions that multiple children at the facility run by Thomas Green were subjected to improper treatment. Ethan's testimony is crucial to our investigation. The detective's words began to fade in Carol's ears. Various memories crossed her mind. The documents her husband had been examining before his death. Thomas's unnatural behavior when visiting the bookstore. And above all, the existence of her grandson, Ethan, standing before her. Suddenly, Ethan spoke in a small voice. "I've been to Grandma's store." Carol snapped back to attention. The boy continued. "I would secretly go there, to read Dad's articles in the newspaper." At those words, tears welled up in David's eyes. Carol quietly stood up and approached Ethan. She gently placed her hand on his thin shoulder. "From now on, you can read as many books as you like." Carol's voice was surprisingly steady. The confusion and questions hadn't disappeared. But for now, she would focus only on the child before her. No matter how cruel the truth might turn out to be. Outside the window, the dark night continued. But dawn would surely come. Until then, she needed to prepare herself to accept this new reality. And to bring the hidden truth of this family into the light. In the consultation room at the police station, despite the late hour, Ethan's testimony recording had begun. Carol and David watched from the adjacent room through a monitor. The boy's thin fingers gripped a paper cup tightly. At first, it was a normal facility. Ethan's voice trembled slightly through the speaker. But things changed 6 months ago. Professor Thomas started talking about special education and taking some children to the basement. The sound of David's fist hitting the desk echoed through the room. Carol placed her hand on her son's arm. Ethan continued. "When I heard that Dad, Mr. David, had come to investigate the facility, Professor Thomas's behavior changed. He said, 'Your father is a dangerous man.'" Ethan's profile on the monitor looked exactly like David's. Carol's memory drifted back 20 years. That morning when her son announced he would take a leave from college. George had been furious. But Thomas Green had intervened, seemingly settling everything amicably, or so they had thought. 2 weeks ago, I was locked in the basement, Ethan's testimony continued. The other children disappeared one by one, but he said I was the trump card for negotiations. The interrogation room door opened, and an FBI agent entered. Ethan's testimony had the potential to develop into a case spanning multiple states. "Let's take a break," the social worker suggested, and Ethan moved to the adjacent room. Carol offered him warm cocoa. She could feel his hands still trembling slightly. "Mrs. Watson," a voice called from the hallway. "Could we discuss your husband's case?" Those words sent a chill down Carol's spine. David leaned forward, but Carol quietly raised her hand to stop him. "All right." Moving to another room, the detective produced a photograph. It was security camera footage from the day of the accident. "Your husband appears to have been arguing with Thomas Green just before the accident." Carol's memory raced to that day. Her husband had been obsessively examining documents. Old receipts, facility financial reports, board meeting minutes. He said something was wrong, Carol began quietly. That there were suspicious points in the facility's accounts. "Actually," the detective leaned forward, "we found evidence of substantial under-the-table payments involving adoptions through Green's facility. And the first person to notice these financial flows was George, wasn't it?" Carol's voice trembled. Everything was starting to connect. Meanwhile, David had opened his laptop. His investigative notes listed inexplicable facts about the facility. Missing children. Suspicious adoption records. Enormous donations. And Mom, David lowered his voice. What if what Dad was investigating at the end was about Ethan's records? Tears welled up in Carol's eyes. Her husband had known about the existence of their grandson, and about the abnormal situation he was in. "Ma'am," the detective spoke, "we believe this was likely not a simple accident." At that moment, commotion erupted in the hallway. "Emergency! Thomas Green has escaped from the facility." David jumped to his feet. "Where's Ethan?" Everyone rushed to the room where the boy had been, but only the social worker lay collapsed on the floor. The window was wide open, letting in the cold wind. "We'll seal off the area immediately." Police officers rushed away. Carol stood by the window, looking out. In the distance, beyond the fog-shrouded streets, sirens began to wail. David embraced his mother's shoulders. "We'll find him." Just then, Carol's cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. With trembling hands, she answered. "Mrs. Watson," a familiar voice resonated. "If you want to know the truth about George's final moments." On the other end of the line, she could hear Ethan's small sobs. A tear rolled down Carol's cheek. The sun was beginning to rise, marking the start of a new day. But this day would change her life forever. Carol quietly gripped the phone. The truth: her husband had died trying to protect. And her grandson, who had just been taken away. She had to stand up to recover everything. The basement of Watson Books. Carol was relaying the contents of Thomas's phone call to the police. Memories from 20 years ago played in her mind like an old film. Back then, Thomas had visited the bookstore twice a week, ostensibly as an antiquarian book collector. But thinking back now, his visits must have had a different purpose. "Mom, these receipts." David was spreading out old account books. Having returned to the bookstore with police permission, they were desperately searching for clues her husband had left behind. From 1999 to 2004, regular sums of money every month. The receipts were made out to Green Educational Fund, an educational foundation established by Thomas. George was, Carol furrowed her brow, the accounting auditor for that foundation, wasn't he? Yes, her husband had also been a member of the city's child welfare board. While in a supervisory position over Thomas's facility, why hadn't he noticed the fraud? Or perhaps, let's check the back storage room. David stood up. The police forensics team had also arrived, and the search quietly began. As she descended the stairs to the storage room, Carol remembered a scene from 20 years ago. What a wonderful collection of rare books, Thomas had said while gazing at the shelves. A tall man with refined features, he was trusted by everyone as a university professor. This, he picked up a book, is a valuable first edition. That day, Thomas had unusually stayed late at the store, having a serious conversation with George. When Carol tried to approach, they abruptly ended their discussion. "Leave David's matter to me," Thomas had said before leaving. Shortly after, David returned to university, and everything seemed to have been resolved. "Mom, look at this," David's voice brought Carol back to the present. They had found an old safe in the back of the storage room. The combination. Carol took out her husband's notebook. On the last page was a meaningful sequence of numbers. 35-24-17. The safe opened with a heavy sound. Inside were a notebook, a USB drive, and "This is," David picked up an envelope, "mine and Mary's." They were adoption papers from that time. However, the official institutional seals were clearly forged. "He knew everything, didn't he?" Carol's voice shook. Her husband had been gathering evidence of Thomas's fraud for years. And when he found the final piece of evidence. Just then, Carol's cell phone rang again. "Are you ready?" Thomas's voice echoed. "Let's discuss all the truth now." "Give Ethan back," Carol managed to force out the words. "Ah, he's fine. A clever boy. Looks just like David, doesn't he?" Ethan's voice could be heard in the background. "Grandma." George, Thomas's voice turned cold, stuck his nose where it didn't belong. "Just like David. You were involved in Dad's death. Come to the old church within 30 minutes with the notebook and USB drive. Just you. If you contact the police, I can't guarantee Ethan's safety." The line went dead. Carol took a deep breath. "Mom, it's dangerous." David tried to stop her. "We should call the police." "David," Carol looked quietly at her son. "We can't afford to lose anyone precious to us again." Mother and son faced each other in the dim storage room. The morning sun streaming through the window tinted the dusty air golden. Carol clutched her husband's notebook to her chest. This was the truth George had died trying to protect. And now, that truth was being demanded in exchange for her grandson's life. "I must go." Carol's voice was surprisingly steady. There was fear, but no more hesitation. Her husband's final homework. The time had come to solve it. David silently draped his mother's coat over her shoulders. Their shadows stretched long in the morning sun. The spire of the old church loomed faintly through the morning mist. St. Mary's Church, where Carol and George had married 35 years ago. Carol's footsteps echoed quietly through the now unused chapel. "Thank you for coming." Thomas stood before the altar. His former intellectual air had vanished, leaving him looking like an exhausted old man. Ethan sat tied to a chair beside the altar, his wrists bound. "Ethan, are you all right?" "Yes." The boy nodded weakly. "Did you bring the documents?" Carol quietly took the notebook and USB drive from her bag. To think George had gathered so much evidence. Thomas gave a bitter smile. He was such a perfectionist. Never did anything halfway. "Why?" Carol's voice trembled. "Why did you do all this?" Thomas heaved a deep sigh. It all began 20 years ago. On the surface, it had been an ideal adoption system. Thomas's facility was known as one of the state's most highly regarded childcare institutions. But in reality, it was a gateway for an international human trafficking organization. Children disappeared into the shadows under the pretext of special adoptions with wealthy foster parents. "It started with small lies," Thomas's voice echoed. "David and Mary's case was just a coincidence at first. But that's when I realized this system could." Clever methods, forged documents, and enormous funds. Carol's husband George, as the city's auditor, had gradually begun tracking traces of the fraud. George must have become certain when he saw Ethan's papers, Thomas continued. "That David's son actually was sold." Carol's voice was ice cold. "Yes. But call it a conscience, perhaps. I kept him close. Using a child of David's blood in this business. So father." Ethan spoke with a trembling voice. "George was a gentleman until the end." Thomas's eyes gazed into the distance. "Let's resolve this through discussion," he said. But I couldn't turn back anymore. The fall down the stairs. A perfect disguise. But just before his death, George had hidden all the evidence in the safe. And now David started investigating too, Thomas said irritably. Like father, like son, sticking his nose where it doesn't belong. Doesn't belong? Carol's voice grew stronger. After ruining children's lives, you say it doesn't belong. Just then, the sound of sirens approached from outside. You didn't. Thomas looked out the window. Yes, Carol stared directly at Thomas. My bag has a GPS tracker. I couldn't risk putting David's son in danger again. As Thomas hurriedly drew a gun, the back doors burst open with a loud bang. FBI. Don't move. Special forces in black uniforms stormed in. The gun fell from Thomas's hand. As Ethan nearly tumbled from his chair, Carol caught him instinctively. Grandma. Ethan's body was trembling. Carol held her grandson tightly. It's all right now. You're not alone anymore. The morning sun streaming through the windows gently enveloped them. The door opened again, and David rushed in. Ethan. Mom. As the three embraced, Carol looked toward the altar. The place where she and her husband had made their vows 35 years ago. Now, new family bonds were being forged here. Thomas was led away in handcuffs. His back no longer carried its former dignity. Behind him, an FBI agent informed Carol. "Ma'am, we found several more children at the facility. And leads on the international organization." Carol nodded quietly. The evidence her husband had gathered at the cost of his life was about to bear fruit. David gently stroked Ethan's hair and said, "Let's go home. To our home." As they left the church, Carol looked back. The morning sun shone through the stained glass, casting colorful lights dancing on the floor, as if blessing their new beginning. Yes, this wasn't an ending. Their story with their new family was just beginning. One snowy morning in December, a "now open" sign stood in front of Watson Books. It was their first day of business in 3 months. Inside, Ethan was helping organize new books. "This is the complete Sherlock Holmes collection, isn't it?" Ethan gently stroked the old leather-bound book. "Yes," Carol smiled. "It was your grandfather's precious collection." 3 months had passed since the incident. Thomas Green's trial continued. The FBI investigation was revealing the full extent of a human trafficking organization that had operated for over 15 years. 26 children had been rescued, and internationally wanted suspects were being arrested one after another. David's series of articles, "The Lost Children," had gained national attention, leading to a review of the supervision system for childcare facilities. "We have customers." Ethan turned at the sound of the entrance bell. "Good morning." Local women came in one after another, carrying warm dishes. They had brought food to celebrate the reopening. Members of the church book club brought homemade cookies. "Ethan, how have you been? Are you keeping up with your homework? Haven't you grown taller?" The community had naturally accepted Ethan. In fact, they seemed genuinely happy about the birth of a new family. "Mom," David came down from the second floor. "Ready for Sunday's speech at church?" For the charity event supporting child care facilities. Carol was scheduled to speak from the podium. She had decided to help create a new monitoring system, carrying on her husband's will. "Yes," Carol gazed at an old photograph. "I think your father would be happy about this." In the back of the store, Ethan was reading a picture book to a young child. He who had once feared human contact now showed natural smiles. "Hey, Grandma," Ethan closed the picture book and ran to Carol. "I wrote this." The manuscript paper he held out had a story written in childish letters. "My new family." Carol felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Dad told me. Grandpa was a hero who fought for justice." Ethan's eyes sparkled. "So I want to become someone who can help others too." David embraced his son's shoulders. His former guilt had transformed into quiet determination. carrying on his father's will, and building a new future with his son. At dusk, after the last customer had left, the three were preparing to close. Ethan stood by the window, watching the continuing snowfall. "Hey," Ethan said. "Do you think this snow is a present from Grandpa in heaven?" Carol gently embraced her grandson. "Yes. I'm sure he's watching over us." Warm lights glowed inside the store. Countless books on the shelves waited to meet new readers. David sat at the back desk, writing tomorrow's article. The articles would continue to tell the truth. And another page was about to be added to their new story. Carol changed the sign to "closed" and turned the key. The bell above the door made a small sound. The snow continued to fall quietly, as if promising a new day. Tomorrow, this small bookstore would open again. There would be books, truth, and above all, a loving family. Carol looked up at the sky. "Thank you, George." Those words gently dissolved into the falling snow. It was a story that began with a midnight visit. Lost truths and new bonds. And now, their story continues to add new chapters. The snowy night was just the beginning.
In the early morning hours, when New York's hustle and bustle hasn't yet begun, I start my day. I switch on the coffee maker and pour myself a cup in the kitchen, where the rich aroma fills the air. This quiet moment is my only time to myself. After changing into my jogging clothes and lacing up my sneakers, the crisp outdoor air instantly awakens my senses. I'm Erin, 32 years old, working as an account director at a major advertising agency and raising my daughter as a single mother. Each day brings both challenges and satisfaction, though I constantly feel the weight of responsibility on my shoulders. 8 years ago, I fell in love with Alexander, who was my colleague at the time. At a company party, I was drawn to his smile and his passion for the advertising industry. That night, champagne glass in hand, we spent hours together, laughing at his jokes and sharing our dreams for the future. "I'm lucky to work with such a passionate woman like you," he said, looking at me with genuine sincerity. As we continued dating, our attraction deepened. We spent weekends at art museums and concerts, finding refuge from work-related stress. His humor and warmth gradually opened my heart. Then one day, during a picnic in Central Park, Alexander presented me with a ring and proposed. "Erin, will you share your life with me?" His voice trembled slightly, but my answer was clear: "Of course, I'd love to." Our wedding was intimate, with only close friends and family in attendance. As we exchanged vows, tears welled up in Alexander's eyes. "With you, I feel like we can overcome any challenge," he said, and I felt deep love and trust in his words. However, after our daughter Lucy was born, my career ambitions grew stronger, which began to displease Alexander. "You're always focused on work. You never think about our family," he would say, his words constricting my heart. Moreover, his mother, Susan, strongly urged me to become a full-time housewife. "Children need their mother. Work should come second," she insisted, which added tremendous pressure. Our marriage deteriorated, and by the time Lucy turned 2, I finally decided to divorce. Life as a single mother was challenging, with each day feeling like a battle, but Lucy's smile was my saving grace. Now 4 years old, Lucy is a curious and adorable daughter whose presence sustains me. Our weekend morning ritual involves making pancakes together. "Mommy, let's add chocolate chips today," Lucy suggests enthusiastically. Watching her tiny hands stir the bowl brings an involuntary smile to my face. While balancing work and childcare is demanding, the time spent with Lucy is my source of energy. However, one day, my peaceful life took an unexpected turn I never could have anticipated. Recently, I'd been struggling with unusual drowsiness and lack of concentration at work. Initially, I attributed it to mere fatigue and stress. But the symptoms progressively worsened. There were times during meetings when I could barely keep my eyes open, and days when I felt completely drained of energy. One morning, my colleague Sarah approached me with concern. "Erin, are you all right? You've seemed really tired lately." "Just tired. Probably because work's been busy," I replied with a forced smile, though deep down, I knew something wasn't right. My condition showed no signs of improvement. I began experiencing dizziness, nausea, and memory problems. Even my boss Mike pointed out that my work performance had declined. "Erin, it's unusual for you to make so many mistakes. If something's wrong, please tell me." "I'm sorry, Mike. I think I'm just feeling under the weather. I'm sure I'll get better soon." I made excuses to get through the moment, but my confidence was steadily eroding. When I returned home, Lucy was playing in the living room. "Welcome home, Mommy." Her cheerful voice was my only comfort. While finding solace in her smile, I continued pondering the reason for my persistent ill health. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Lucy came into the kitchen. "Mommy, can I help?" "Of course, Lucy." I asked her to wash the vegetables. While I started cooking the steak, I noticed from the corner of my eye that she was holding a small bottle. "Lucy, what's that?" I asked. "This? Daddy gave it to me. He said it's an energy drink to make Mommy feel better," Lucy replied innocently. "Energy drink?" Though puzzled, I told Lucy to put it away. "Thank you, but I don't need it right now." That night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about that small bottle. Why had Alexander given such a thing to Lucy? Could it be connected to my health issues? My suspicions only grew stronger. The next day, I deliberately chose to eat out and avoided consuming anything at home. Surprisingly, after a few days, my symptoms of drowsiness and dizziness began to subside. I was convinced this wasn't a coincidence. One evening, I caught Lucy trying to mix a light blue liquid from a small bottle into my dinner. "Lucy, what are you doing?" I asked, maintaining my composure. "Daddy said this would make Mommy feel better. He said it's a secret game and not to let Mommy know." Lucy explained innocently. "Daddy said that?" I felt anger rising inside me but kept my voice calm. "Yes, that's what Daddy said," Lucy answered with a smile. That night, after Lucy went to bed, I returned to the kitchen and retrieved the small bottle she had been holding. My heart was pounding. To identify the contents of this liquid, I took the bottle to a doctor the next day. "Could you analyze this liquid? I need to know what's in it." I explained the situation to the doctor while trying to maintain my composure. Before going to the police, I felt I needed to gather concrete evidence against Alexander and Susan. I decided to hire a private investigator to look into their activities. I knew I had to do whatever necessary to protect my daughter and myself. Thinking there might be more of those small bottles in the house, I began a thorough search. Late at night, after Lucy had fallen asleep, I searched every corner of the house. After checking the kitchen cabinets, refrigerator, and even Lucy's room thoroughly, I found nothing. Just as fatigue was setting in, I had a thought to check Lucy's toy box. There, I discovered several empty medication containers. The containers had labels for sleeping pills and anti-anxiety medications. I was shocked to my core. "Alexander, what on earth is he thinking?" I whispered to myself as I held the containers, determined to confront him. The next day, after dropping Lucy off at preschool, I called Alexander. "Alexander, we need to talk. Can you meet me right now?" "Aaron, what's this about?" Alexander sounded surprised, but I firmly stated, "I want to meet now," and hung up. We agreed to meet at a nearby cafe. I tucked the empty containers I'd found in Lucy's room into my bag and took a deep breath to calm myself. When I entered the cafe, Alexander was already seated. I sat across from him and placed the containers on the table. "Do you know what these are?" I asked calmly. Alexander showed a momentary look of surprise but quickly regained his composure and replied, "What about them?" "Lucy was using these to mix something into my dinner." "She said you told her to do it," I questioned, containing my anger. "What are you talking about, Aaron?" "I would never do such a thing." Alexander completely denied it, but I held his gaze. "I've sent this for testing. When the results come back, we'll know the truth." At my words, Alexander was momentarily speechless but then said, "Do whatever you want," and left. Back home, I immediately contacted Connor, the private investigator. He was experienced and had solved many complex cases. "Connor, I need your help. I think my ex-husband is plotting something." Connor listened calmly and said, "I understand. I'll start investigating his activities. Meanwhile, gather as much evidence as you can." I placed my trust in him and left the investigation in his hands. A few days later, Connor's report arrived. He had discovered that Alexander and Susan were meeting frequently, and Alexander had been making multiple visits to pharmacies. He also obtained recordings of their phone conversations. In one conversation, Alexander said, "If the plan works, Erin will have no choice but to quit her job." Listening to the recording, I felt both anger and sadness well up inside me. So he was doing this to corner me. I couldn't stop my tears. Connor continued his investigation and ultimately uncovered that Alexander and Susan had been planning to force me back into being a full-time housewife. They had been trying to deteriorate my work performance to the point where I would have no choice but to quit. Aaron, here's the evidence. Your ex-husband and his mother were systematically trying to trap you, Connor said as he handed me the evidence. Thank you, Connor. Now I finally know the truth, I expressed my gratitude to him. Afterward, I immediately consulted with the police. I submitted all the evidence I had and explained Alexander and Susan's plan to them. After the meeting at the police station, I returned home to greet Lucy. I needed to embrace her as if nothing had happened, to reassure her. Though my heart was turbulent with anxiety and anger, I didn't want to show her even a hint of it. The next morning, I met with Mary, my lawyer who had helped me during the divorce. I trusted she would give appropriate advice for this situation as well. Aaron, this isn't a simple situation. But the evidence you've gathered is very compelling. Her words gave me a glimmer of hope. Mary, I just want to protect Lucy. Her safety is my top priority, my voice trembled. I understand, Aaron. We'll do everything we can to protect you and Lucy, Mary's words provided some comfort. The police began investigating Alexander and Susan. Their actions and phone records were scrutinized, further substantiating the evidence I had provided. It became clear that Alexander and Susan had plotted to drug my food, using Lucy as their unwitting accomplice. One day, the police contacted me, and an investigator visited us. Ms. Aaron, we've confirmed Alexander and Susan's involvement. They were acting with intent to harm you. However, this wasn't the end. Although Alexander and Susan were arrested, we needed to prove their guilt in court. Mary and I organized the evidence and prepared for trial. When the trial began, Alexander's lawyer claimed his innocence. This is a misunderstanding. Alexander only wanted to help Aaron. Those words rang hollow to me. Though nervous, I was determined to tell the truth. One day, I witnessed my daughter mixing liquid into my food. She said she was following instructions from my ex-husband. During my testimony, I fought back tears several times. The recordings, videos, and medication containers that Mary submitted as evidence proved decisive. Connor's investigation report also detailed their plan thoroughly. As the trial progressed, Alexander and Susan's plan gradually came to light. They had plotted to harm my health to interfere with my career and force me to become a housewife. The atmosphere in the courtroom gradually turned against them. Defendants Alexander and Susan, you deliberately attempted to harm Aaron's health and interfere with her career. This act is extremely malicious, and I find you guilty, the judge's voice resonated through the courtroom. In that moment, I felt a great weight lift from my heart. Alexander protested violently, shouting, "These are all Aaron's lies," but his voice fell on deaf ears in the courtroom. Susan wept, mumbling, "I just wanted to help my son." But her words too rang hollow. After the verdict was delivered, I met Connor outside the courtroom. "Aaron, you did well. Lucy is safe now." I took a deep breath at his words. "Thank you so much, Connor. I couldn't have made it this far without you," I expressed my gratitude to him. Afterward, I decided to move to Boston with my daughter to start a new life. I thought starting fresh in a new environment would be the best choice for us. As our new life in Boston began, we quickly adapted to the environment. Our new home was spacious, and Lucy had her own room. Lying in bed, all our past difficulties felt like distant memories. The next morning, Lucy bounced into my bed with a big smile. "Mommy, I love our new house. I'm going to make lots of friends here." Seeing her innocent smile filled me with new hope. After settling in from the move, I started work at a new advertising agency. Though nervous on my first day, I was quickly put at ease by my colleagues' warm welcome. My boss Catherine was experienced and very reliable. "Erin, let's create wonderful projects together using your experience." Her words heightened my enthusiasm for new challenges. Lucy also started at her new preschool. Though a bit anxious on her first day, she had completely bounced back by the time she returned home. "Mommy, I made a new friend." We drew pictures together. Lucy's eyes were sparkling. "Really? What kind of friend?" I asked happily. "She's very kind and good at drawing. I want you to meet her someday." Lucy's face was beaming with smiles. Seeing Lucy's smile made me feel that all our past struggles had been worthwhile. I felt that I had been able to build a new life for her sake and my own. Our daily routine gradually stabilized. On weekdays, I would drop Lucy off at preschool before heading to work. Weekends became our special time for visiting parks and museums, making every day enjoyable. One day, Lucy suddenly said, "Mommy, I'm so glad we moved here." "Yes, Lucy. I'm truly happy we could start a new life here," I answered while hugging her. Work at my new workplace was going well, and I was soon entrusted with several important projects. In particular, an advertising campaign for a major client was very successful, earning high praise from my boss Catherine. "Erin, your leadership is truly outstanding. Keep up the good work." One day when I returned from work, Lucy ran up to me. "Mommy, I wrote an essay about my mother at preschool today. The teacher really praised it." "Really? Can you tell me what you wrote?" I asked with curiosity. "Yes, I wrote about how strong and wonderful you are. I wrote that you're my hero." Lucy's words made my heart swell. "Thank you, Lucy. You're the reason I can keep going." As I hugged her, I felt that all our struggles had been worth it. The next day, Lucy was drawing in the living room. "Mommy, look." She showed me her picture, which was very colorful and depicted us playing together. "It's a beautiful drawing, Lucy. You really have talent." I praised her artwork while feeling joy in her growth. I also began volunteering at a nonprofit organization supporting working single mothers. Through my own experiences, supporting women in similar situations became my new mission. Every weekend, I attended the organization's meetings, listening to women's stories and helping them solve their problems. "Miss Erin, your story really encouraged me," one woman said with tears in her eyes. Her words deeply moved me. Lucy also became interested in my activities, saying, "Mommy, I want to volunteer too." One day, we organized an event for mothers, and Lucy helped look after the children. She naturally showed leadership while playing with the other kids. "Mommy, today's event was so much fun. I want to do it again." Seeing Lucy's smile, I realized how much she had grown. The bond between us mother and daughter deepened, and we built a relationship of mutual support in our daily lives. Lucy enjoyed her preschool life with new friends, while I found fulfillment through work and volunteer activities, meeting many people. Then, new challenges and joys came into our lives. One day, I was assigned a major project at work. I decided to give it my all and worked on it with my team. After overcoming many difficulties, the project was a great success. "Erin, you did an amazing job. This project succeeded thanks to your effort and leadership." Catherine looked at me proudly as she said this. That night, while having dinner with Lucy, I shared this joy with her. "Lucy, today was a really wonderful day. Mommy's project was successful." "That's amazing, Mommy. Congratulations." Lucy couldn't hide her joy and hugged me. While we enjoyed our new life, we never forgot our past experiences. They had made us stronger and given us the strength to live positively. I vowed to continue sharing many challenges and joys with Lucy. Later, I developed even bigger goals. I decided to join a movement advocating for legal reforms to protect working mothers' rights. Our activities gradually gained attention and many supporters. "We're so grateful for your activities. Thanks to you, many mothers have been saved," one supporter told me. Eventually, our movement succeeded, and legal reforms were achieved. Working mothers' rights were protected, and an environment where they could work with peace of mind was established. I felt proud of these achievements and vowed to continue supporting many people. Lucy also continued pursuing her dreams. She developed an interest in art and joined an art club. Her work gradually gained attention, and she even won an award at an exhibition. "Mommy, look! My painting won an award." Lucy's eyes were shining. "That's wonderful, Lucy. I'm so proud of your talent." I hugged her, rejoicing in her growth. The bond between us grew stronger than ever as we built our new life together, supporting each other. Having overcome past difficulties made us stronger and more positive about life. 12 years have passed. Lucy and I have built a fulfilling life in Boston, meeting many people and gathering various experiences. Lucy is now in high school, steadily working toward her dreams. Her goal is to attend art school and build a career as an artist. "Mom, would you look at my portfolio?" One evening, Lucy called out from her room. Her work had become more refined each year. As I carefully looked through each piece in her portfolio, I could sense her growth. "These are wonderful, Lucy. Your work really shows your heart and soul." I smiled at her. "Thanks, Mom." "It's all thanks to you," Lucy smiled shyly. Mother's Day had become our traditional event day. This event supporting working mothers grew larger each year, attracting many participants. That day, too, the venue was filled with the smiles of participating mothers and children. "Erin, thank you for another wonderful event this year," one participant called out to me. "Thank you all. This event continues because of everyone's support," I replied with gratitude. At the end of the event, Lucy's specially prepared artwork was displayed. Her painting depicted working mothers, expressing both strength and gentleness. Many mothers were moved to tears when they saw it. "Lucy, this painting is truly beautiful. We're all deeply moved by how you've captured the essence of motherhood," one mother expressed her gratitude to Lucy. "Thank you. I wanted to show how strong and wonderful my mother is, and all mothers are." Lucy's words warmed my heart. Though we've overcome many challenges, those experiences have strengthened us and given us the courage to face new challenges. Watching Lucy pursue her dreams, I felt proud of how much she had grown. One day, while having dinner together, Lucy suddenly said, "Mom, I want to continue supporting working mothers in the future too. Seeing what you've done inspired me to help others." "That's wonderful, Lucy. I know you'll be able to help many people," I replied, deeply moved. "Our bond is stronger than ever, and I believe it will continue to grow." Having overcome past difficulties, we now look toward a new future. Eventually, Lucy was accepted into art school, taking her first step toward her new journey. Her dreams were becoming more real, and I found joy in watching her progress. "Mom, let's keep working hard together," Lucy said with a smile. "Of course, Lucy. Being by your side is my happiness," I promised as I hugged her, vowing to continue walking this path together. Our story continues. New challenges and joys await us, and we believe we'll overcome them and continue growing together. I look forward to the days ahead, walking alongside Lucy. After all, the bond between mother and daughter has the strength to overcome any difficulty.